Are you ready for some smart, plain talk on politics, Israel, and the law? It's the Andrew Parker Show. Let's roll. Welcome to another episode of the Andrew Parker Show, and thank you once again for joining us as we talk politics, Israel, and the law each and every episode, and this is episode 493, and we are honored on this episode to have a returning guest to the show, one whose opinion we should all pay attention to because it is learned, it is educated, and it will make you think. And that is one of Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the now Jerusalem News Syndicate, JNS. He is a senior contributor to the Federalist, columnist in Newsweek. He has been a contributor and often asked to comment on CNN, BBC, Fox News, certainly Newsmax, and in Israel, I-24, which I would call one of the, if not the leading broadcast stations. He was previously executive editor at Commentary Magazine back in the 90s, when it was quite meaningful. Commentary Magazine was. Still might be, to be fair. Still might be. And Jonathan is a graduate with a degree in history from the esteemed Columbia University. And I want to start there. What do you think of your alma mater, Jonathan? And whether a history degree today might be similar to the one you received, when was it? Back in the 70s. Not to date you, but what do you think? Columbia University.
Well, Columbia was always very left-wing, and it was a struggle for anybody who wasn't left-wing, even a long time ago when I was there. It's gotten a lot worse. Is the degree worth less? The market determines the value of such things. But clearly it is different in that when I was there, dissent was allowed, indeed even encouraged. And now it's a very lockstep left-wing place. It is one of many places, and not alone in this, where the toll of the toxic left-wing ideas that have gradually taken hold of our education establishment and our culture, much of our country, critical race theory, intersectionality, settler colonialism. And from that, so much has followed, degrading not merely scholarship, but enabling extremism and antisemitism. And, it's kind of a disgrace, is what it is. And, but it's the same is true of its competitors, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and others in the Ivy League and elsewhere. Columbia has changed for the worse in many ways, but in the same way that our society has changed for the worse.
Indeed, so true, and the issue becomes those under the age of 30, an entire generation, really, and maybe a couple of them at least, are now being fed an entirely different, revised history, as it were, and are buying it lock, stock and barrel. And if you push back on that, you do so at your own peril, your economic peril, your employment peril, and sometimes physical peril. Let's turn.
Let me just add one point. And,
sure.
You about Columbia. The pride of Columbia College, which is the undergraduate division of a large university, was always its core curriculum. It was the great books curriculum, with far more required courses than any other, really major university in terms of undergraduate study, in which young people, young men, and then eventually young men and women, were forced to read all of the great works of Western civilization and what was contemporary civilization, the political philosophy courses you had to take, and humanities courses you had to take, and art humanities and music humanities. This was at the core of Western civilization. Columbia's purpose was to create educated people in the glories of the West. The trouble is the ideology that school and everything else in our establishment has embraced is at war with the West. And from that, everything else follows. Everything in terms of this war on America, hating the West, and as a consequence, hating Israel and the Jews.
Well, and along those lines, and a perfect segue, I would like to talk with you about, get your judgment, your assessment of what I call the October 7th phenomena. How is it that October 7th occurs with such savagery and barbarism against the Jewish people, against Israelis, and out of it comes a burgeoning additional uber hatred toward the state of Israel and support, sometimes open support, for Hamas and the perpetrators and the butchers that engaged in October 7th?
Well, the answer is actually very simple. If you believe in these toxic theories that we've just discussed, then you believe the only way to understand the world is to divide it between two classes of people. The people of color, who are always victims and always in the right no matter what they do, right or wrong. And on the other side, the white oppressors, who are always in the wrong no matter what they do, right?
The colonizers.
Exactly. Now, that is a toxic, very bad way to understand the world. It's a terrible way to understand the United States. It denies agency to minorities, demonizes everyone else, and puts us all at odds with each other, and undermines the efforts to create progress, the efforts that we have achieved in this country to make progress racially and economically. But with respect to Israel, it is particularly insane because because they are not as weak as the Palestinian Arabs, defining the Palestinian Arabs as the people of color victims, and the Israelis as the white oppressors, you're committing a number of errors. Number one, Israelis aren't white. Jews aren't necessarily white. In fact, the majority of the population of Israeli Jews are, by the definitions of the American left, people of color, because they trace their origins to the Middle East and North Africa or to Ethiopia. But the point is, even those Jews who can be classified as white are part of the most oppressed minority group in the history of the world of the last 2,000 years. But because they are, at this point, because they survived efforts to destroy them and to kill them in Israel's early years, and because they are successful, they therefore are white oppressors. The Palestinian Arabs are, they're the Jews' cousins, but because they're weak, because they, because they have rejected peace, and because they are, the losers here, in the intersectional way of thinking, they must be right. And so it doesn't matter what they do. If you believe that, and you believe in the myths of settler colonialism, that Israel has no right to exist, even though it's the Jews' homeland, and it's, if anybody, were the colonizers there, it was the Arabs. But if you believe in this, then it doesn't matter that the Palestinian Arabs who crossed the border on October 7th to commit mass murder, rape, torture, kidnapping and wanton destruction, the worst mass slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. It doesn't matter that they behave like barbarians and are clearly in the wrong, because they're the good guys in the intersectional way of thinking about the world. They are therefore in the right. And the Jews had it coming, no matter
Had
what
it
was
coming.
done to them. And that is why, instead of provoking a wave of sympathy for Israel and revulsion, deserved revulsion against the Palestinian Arabs and their 100-year war to rid the Jewish homeland of the Jews, our campuses, Columbia as well as many others, erupted into demonstrations on behalf of the Palestinians and Hamas. Are the left wing of our political establishment in this country, the Democrats, for the most part the Democrats, and some people on the far right who agree with them bizarrely, did the same thing. They sympathize with Israel's enemies. They buy into conspiracy theories about Israel and the Jews, and therefore, we have, what historian Neil Ferguson called the treason of the intellectuals, whereby they have embraced a new group of beliefs that is comparable in some ways to what the Nazis did a century ago. And the people doing it think they're being righteous. They think they're the good guys. They think they're right thinking, in spite of the fact that they are basically cheering for they have made anti-Semitism, permissible, and engaging in support for horrible, horrible things. It's part of the same war against the West. But when it comes to Israel, you could say that America is a settler colonial nation, and by their lights it is, but kind of hard to imagine America being erased. It's not all going back to the Native Americans. Nobody can imagine that. Nobody sane, anyway. It's possible to imagine a small country of 10 million, no matter how successful it is, to be erased. So therefore, people on our college campuses and people in Capitol Hill as well are reading from a script that was frankly written for them by the Soviet Union, by the anti-Semitic propagandists of the Marxist movement of 50 years ago, in which they are trying to write Israel out of existence, because they don't just hate Israel and the Jews, they also hate America.
It is true. We're talking to Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem News Syndicate. Go to jns.org. Jonathan, you really hit on it, and it is another one of the most blatant lies, purposeful untruths, also so many ignorant who just pick up on it and carry it, and that is that the Jewish people have no right to the state of Israel. They have no legal right, no physical right, none whatsoever, when it could not be further from the truth. I dare say there are not a people on earth who have more of a right to the land that they are on than the Jewish people. Period. And full stop. And it really comes back to virtually every other country. Jonathan, check me if I'm wrong. Virtually every other country, not every, but almost everyone in the Middle East was created by colonial movement. We're talking about all the Arab countries were created that way. Mm-hmm. At the end of this war or that war, that's how these countries were created. But Israel can be marked back archaeologically, scientifically, to thousands of years, at least to the Roman Empire, but certainly before that.
Yeah, I mean, the way the reason the Arabs have such a problem with archaeology in the land of Israel is that all you got to do, wherever you're standing there, you just start digging, and eventually you'll find proof of Jewish life, proof of the Jewish heritage of that particular spot on Earth. The key thing to understand here, for our purposes here in the United States, is that criticism. The ground rules are clear. criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. As I always like to say, 10 million Israelis get up every morning and criticize their government for one reason or another. It's a democratic country. Just as 335 million Americans get up every day and criticize their government for one reason or another. The issue isn't whether Israel should be criticized or its government is perfect. It's whether it has a right to exist. There is no other country in the world that has an international movement dedicated to its destruction. And the fact that it is the one Jewish state on the planet is not a coincidence. Anti-Zionism is about denying rights to Jews that you would not deny to anyone else. It is about treating Jews and their rights and their existence and the right to self-defense in a way you treat no other country. It is about demonizing them and their efforts. No other country at war, frankly, has behaved as morally and with as much concern for civilian casualties when they're fighting a war for their own existence as the Israelis have done since October 7th. But everything Israel does is considered genocide because nothing the Jews do is right, because nothing the Jews can do in their own defense is defensible. We can have a discussion about the rights and wrongs of every Israeli policy. Israelis do it every day, but what Israel's enemies, what its detractors in this country, who say we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Zionist, or we're just against, Israel's government, what they're doing is denying rights to the Jews that they don't deny to anyone else, not merely judging it by double standards, but judging it by standards that don't apply to anybody else on earth. And that sort of discrimination, as a term of art, as you lawyers like to say, the term of art for that is anti-Semitism. It's Jew hatred. And that's what's behind this wave of condemnation and of hatred towards Israel and the Jews since October 7th. It's not reasonable. It's not based in fact. There's no way you can define the war that Israel has fought as genocide, because if that is genocide, then there has never been a war fought in history that wasn't genocide. Nobody cares about the woes of the Palestinians, the self-inflicted woes of the Palestinians, the way they care about the Palestinians, because their enemies are the Jews. And
Right.
That's what this is about. And to try to divert the discussion, well, we don't like Netanyahu. Netanyahu has not acted any differently than any Israeli prime minister, including his opponents in the upcoming election, would have acted, the way any American president, left or right, Republican or Democrat, would react if we were attacked in that manner. So these arguments are disingenuous. This is about anti-Semitism. This is about how an ideology that hates the West has enabled a war of hatred against the people who are the foundation of the West, and that is the Jews.
Let's take that thesis and bring it on shore here in the United States. What is the relationship that the Republican Party has with Israel, and what is the relationship now that the Democratic Party has with Israel, and where are they headed?
Well, the interesting question is where they're headed. The two parties have, really for all intents and purposes, exchanged identities on Israel over the course of the last half century, 60 years. If we were having this discussion, if we were going into the Wayback Machine and say, we were in the 1960s, how do the two parties view Israel? If, say, in the early 60s we were talking about it, we'd say, well, the Democrats are pretty much mostly pro-Israel. The Republicans are split on Israel. Some of them just don't care. Some of them are a little bit anti-Semitic. A few are supportive. And the Democrats were mostly supportive. Today,
the Republicans had that isolationist still bent.
Yeah, it was not rooted in the same kind of hatred as we've just discussed.
No.
But they were, it was sort of country club anti-Semitism, or, the influence of the oil industry, which was, sucking up to the Arabs. Today, the situation is very clear. The Republicans, at least as far as the governing class, the people in Congress, the elected officials, with very few exceptions, are lockstep pro-Israel. You can love or hate Donald Trump. He's the most pro-Israel president we've ever had. The division, say in the House and the Senate, there may be one in each body. There's one Republican in each body that isn't very enthusiastically pro-Israel. On the other hand, the Democratic Party, which was once very pro-Israel, is now overwhelmingly anti-Israel. We've seen that in both the House and the Senate, where basically 40 out of 47 Democrats voted to cut all aid to Israel and to really end the alliance. Last week, the week before we're taping this, we had a vote in the House, and the majority of House Democrats took the same stand.
Over 100.
Including some that once, not just the congressional squad, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and AOC and the rest of the so-called hardcore progressives, but even those who once had considered themselves pro-Israel. They are on the run from their intersectional left-wing base that hates Israel for the reasons that we've already discussed. So in that sense, the two parties have switched. Now, there is one, it's very clear. We have a pro-Israel party and in the Republicans, and the Democrats are clearly now the anti-Israel party.
It's a requirement.
Let me just give you one caveat to that.
Yes.
And the one caveat is named J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
The vice president, who certainly when he was running for vice president in 2024, running for the Senate in 2022, was pretty, was pro-Israel and maybe not as enthusiastic as some. Today, he is embracing, some of the same conspiratorial, delusions about Israel that the people on the far left do. And indeed, his whole shtick is that he wants to be a bridge between the sort of Groyper wing, if you can dignify it by calling it a wing, a minority of the Republican Party that loves his friend Tucker Carlson and other even crazier podcasters like Candace Owens and the neo-Nazi Groyper Nick Fuentes. He won't condemn Carlson. He still embraces him. He wants to keep them he wants to keep the anti-Semites in the Republican tent. And as long as he is, for all intents and purposes, the crown prince of the Republican Party, not merely the vice president, one heartbeat away from the presidency, but as of now, way too early, but 2 years in front of 2028, he is by more than 20 points in every poll, the front runner for the 2028 Republican presidential nomination. And that's the one caveat to the Republicans being the pro-Israel party. The guy who's currently the favorite to be its next leader is not pro-Israel.
Absolutely, and as you said, the Democratic Party now, whether it is their platform, it will be soon written, but whether it is now or not, it has become a requirement. You cannot come out publicly, John Fetterman, and have any hope of getting through a Democratic primary for a congressional seat. It just isn't going to happen. You're going to lose.
Speaking to you from Pennsylvania, I can tell you John Fetterman is not going to be renominated by the Democrats. John Fetterman is the one unadulterated pro-Israel Democrat, certainly in the Senate. That's not the way he ran. It's kind of how he woke up after his stroke. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I can't entirely explain it to you. And I can tell you that if you were a left-wing Pennsylvania Democrat, you have a right to ask for a refund because he was elected. He won that primary on the basis of being hard left, and he woke up from his stroke, which is great that he recovered from a terrible health challenge. And he woke up. He became a centrist and an ardent friend of Israel. But he's not saleable. He's not viable in the Democratic Party anymore. The governor of Pennsylvania, who is a Jew, Josh Shapiro, and by the lights of the Democrats, a moderate, though he's very, very liberal and somebody I know well. He's my neighbor and as well as a fellow congregant. He's really in the wrong party if he wants to be president. That's a really heavy burden for him. But Democrats all over the country who are hardcore left-wingers, people like Dan Goldman in New York City, who, this is the guy that led one of the bogus impeachments of Donald Trump. just a few years ago. He's left on every issue, but because he's not anti-Israel, he's lost the nomination for his seat. He's going home, and that's happened all over the country, and I think will happen even more frequently in the coming years.
Yeah, it is. It is amazing. It's hard to explain. Which, when such things arise, I simply say Baruch Hashem. That John Fetterman woke up, and he woke up with an entirely different perspective on
He claims
moral issues.
different, but that's
Yeah,
really kind of the truth.
yeah, it appears to be, and these are fundamental moral clarity issues. Let me ask him. We're talking to Jonathan Tobin, editor in chief of Jerusalem News Syndicate. Go to jns.org. Jonathan, if you can, I want to turn not so much to the parties, one versus the other, but more so to the U.S. Israel relationship. And this is, I've been involved with and proudly a part of and a member of and on the National Council for many, many years of APAC and have more than 30 years in involvement. So I have a sense of tracking of the U.S. Israel relationship. But today we are seeing something that we have never seen since the organization was founded in 1951 by Cy Kennan and Abba Eban. So describe the history, if you will, a little bit of this important alliance, of this important relationship, where it sits today, and what your prediction is for where it's going.
Well, APAC, it is, democracy in act. It is an example of how democracy works. Americans organized to support Israel and do so through all the normal levers of politics. And that's what APAC has done, and it thrived and grew. Not, it's kind of mythic. It's not, the giant that its opponents, depicted as, but it is, it is a potent lobbying force in Washington, because people throughout the country told their elected representatives in the House and the Senate that we're for Israel. If you want our support, you got to be for Israel. And so, honestly, it was a reflection of the fact that the overwhelming majority of the American people were pro-Israel, because plenty of people in districts without a Jewish population were like, okay, yeah, you're right, I agree with that. There's no reason for me not to support Israel, but it became, over the last 20 years, since two scholars, Stephen Walt and John Merton, wrote a much despised conspiracy theory that was an essay in the London Review of Books, and then a book itself called The Israel Lobby. It was pumped into this, it basically became an anti-Semitic trope about Jews buying Congress, Jews buying the American government, being a vast conspiracy. In truth, AIPAC spends far less on influencing Washington and elections than the Soros family does, the left-wing philanthropists, political activists. It spends far less as a lobby. It's a pygmy compared to the likes of the oil industry, the big pharma, or insurance, or basically any other industry. It's not a major lobby in terms of that, or in terms of money spent. But because it's associated with Israel and the Jews, it's the focus of a conspiracy theory. And it's a conspiracy theory that is part of the organizing principle for politics in the Democratic Party this year, as of now. We see right now the race going on across the border from you in Michigan, where Abdul el-Sayed, an anti-Israel Islamist, his whole campaign, is basically, they used to joke about Rudy Giuliani's ambitions for president, and his typical campaign speech was, a noun, a verb, and 9/11. Well, for El Sayed, it's a noun, a verb, and AIPAC. The
Yeah.
whole focus of his race to the Senate is he's going to stop AIPAC, which, he's going to stop the Jews from controlling America. It's a conspiracy theory. It's an anti-Semitic trope. It's a big lie, but it's a big lie that, a lot of people in the Democratic Party now believe as accepted truth, the way they believe that Israel is committing genocide, even though there's, no reason, no logical reason, no proof. It's a big lie, but it is. It's not merely a function of this growth of post October 7th anti-Semitism. It illustrates how anti-Semitism has become, mainstream discourse, mainstream politics, and it is now for Democrats. I've mentioned that there is a right-wing, Groyper anti-Semitic wing of the Republicans. They don't win elections. Thomas Massey was the one who proposed to cut Israel aid. He's a libertarian Republican from Kentucky. The vote in the House last week among Republicans was 214-1 against it. The Democrats, the majority of them, voted with Massey, who was defeated in a primary. I mean,
the Republicans kicked him out of the party. Yeah, they kicked him out.
It's the opposite of what's happening among Democrats.
Right.
So,
A record of success second to none. Parker Daniels Keyboard Law Firm, the numbers tell the story. The last 5 cases our lawyers have brought to trial have resulted in million and multi-million-dollar verdicts for our plaintiff clients and 0 defense verdicts for our defense clients. Put simply, we try cases and we win cases. Hi, I'm Andrew Parker. At Parker Daniels Keyboard, we take our work personally and we go the extra mile. That is why some of the biggest law firms, locally and nationally, send cases to us to handle when they can't. If you have a challenging and critically important business or personal legal dispute that must be favorably resolved, whether regarding a contract matter, a business divorce, a real estate dispute, an employment dispute, a civil rights or defamation matter, plain talk, if it's a big deal, contact us at Parker Daniels Keyboard. Wise counsel, winning results. Go to parkerdk.com.
For Democrats, the 2 issues that they seem to care most about right now are, on the one hand, hostility to enforcement of immigration laws, anti-ICE, and hatred for Israel. I mean, it's kind of crazy that the party that once considered itself the party of the working people, only cares about, illegal immigration, which hurts working people, lowers their standards of living, increases, lowers wages, increases the price of housing and the cost of living in so many different ways. It's terrible for working people. And, anti-Semitism. That's crazy. Now, that has heretofore in American history, anti-Semitism has always been a political loser, and we have to pray that continues. But right now, among Democrats, it's a winning issue.
And it's a winning issue because of the anti-Israel kind of barnacle hanging on anti-Semitism. It is people couch it in a different way, then they throw BB on top of it, and they try to wiggle around avoiding anti-Semitism, at least reference to anti-Semitism or being accused of being an anti-Semite by moving that food around the plate, if you will. Yeah, it really has become dangerous in our democracy to challenge and, in fact, to vilify those that are engaging in the democratic process. And that is what AIPAC does. AIPAC now has basically said we're not going to be supporting the 100-plus Democrats who voted against aid for Israel during a time of war.
Yeah, that's a very important point. It's great that they've woken up and are doing that. And I'm a friend. I spoke at the AIPAC conference in February, so
yes, I recall
disclaimer. I'm certainly supportive of their efforts, but the thing to understand about how AIPAC went about its work for the last 70 years is that it has been reflexively bipartisan. They their whole point was to support both Republicans and Democrats running for office as long as they were pro-Israel. And that annoyed some people on the right over the course of the last 10 to 20 years because they said the Democrats are trending in the wrong direction. You're supporting
Right.
a lot of people whom you can't rely on. And indeed, a lot of the people that voted the wrong way on that Massey resolution last week were people who had in the past gotten support from AIPAC and support from Jewish pro-Israel donors. They shouldn't get that support. This is just democracy. Like you support the people who support the things you want. There's no ulterior motives about it. There's nothing crazy or anti-democratic about it. It's just democracy in action. And it took a long time for AIPAC to wake up to the fact that they just can't go on backing people who really aren't pro-Israel because they were so dedicated to this idea of bipartisanship. And it was a noble goal, and it worked for a long time, but it just isn't working anymore.
And it is shut down for those who oppose Israel so blatantly and publicly as voting with Thomas Massey. Let's turn a couple more topics, Jonathan, that I want to cover with you. One is Iran. I want to get your judgment, your opinion. I've had several shows in a row where I've expressed throughout the show my views of how Donald Trump and the administration has handled the Iran war right up to the present. And then I'd like to close with a little discussion on Israeli politics.
Okay.
So on Iran, what are your thoughts?
The President Trump rightly has been pursuing a foreign policy goal of every one of his predecessors to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, to stop their spread of terrorism, stop their policy of trying to intimidate their opponents, achieve regional hegemony with, missiles, terrorism, and their threat of a nuclear weapon. That's been a foreign policy goal for a long time. He, as he has on many other issues, he just came to conclusions and said, we're not going to shilly-shally around about it anymore. And in the 12-day war of last year, and then again in the war that started on February 28th, he recognized that it's going to take more than just talking to stop Iran. The problem is that President Trump, and I think to some extent the American people as a whole, we don't have much patience with long wars or with paying a cost for our foreign policy goals. And indeed, America, every casualty is a tragedy. But America didn't pay a very high cost in casualties. Very few people were killed in the war. But we paid a price, and an extra dollar or more in the price of gas, and that made the war very unpopular. Trump didn't do a very good job explaining, or really try at all to explain the war. That's to his discredit. And, after about 6 weeks, he was like, I'm getting a little impatient. I don't want to do this anymore. And, he agreed to a ceasefire, and then he allowed Vice President Vance to negotiate a memorandum of understanding along with his son-in-law Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, the Qatar-bribed Middle East envoy that he has out there. And, we made a terrible deal with the Iranians and discovered, just as every previous administration has discovered, that the Iranians don't keep their word about anything. They can't be negotiated with. They're religious fanatics, this group as well as the ones who were killed after February 28th. And you can't, Barack Obama, when he was appeasing Iran a decade ago, said he wanted to give Iran a chance to get right with the world. Well, Iran didn't want to get right with the world. They are at war with the West, with the little Satan Israel, and especially the great Satan the United States.
And Jonathan, they will never change.
No, not this regime. It's their DNA, it's their religion. It's literally their religion.
Yeah.
They're not changing. And so, he sent J.D. Vance to Switzerland to negotiate an end to an unpopular war in the, I think, foolish belief that ending it would undo whatever damage it had done to the Republicans in the midterms. It's not. The damage is done already. And if there's anything more, more unpopular than an unpopular war, it's an unpopular war that you lose. And
Yeah.
the deal that they were going to do with the Iranians was losing, was a loss, was handing them an undeserved victory. But the Iranians, can't be dealt with. And, sort of Trump is, as I put it, to quote one of my pieces, it's like he was doing this new version of The Apprentice with, Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And, Vance is losing because he's doing terribly. And that's why he's, flailing around with conspiracy theories to blame why, to shift the blame from himself and his bad ideas. And now the United States is being forced to realize that it must fight, it must defeat Iran. I'm not sure that Trump is going to go back to, a policy of actually trying to defeat Iran. I think the exchange of fire in the last week or two is more like both sides negotiating. But we'll see. But the point is, this is a war that, as my information, the Israelis told Trump, last winter, it's going to take a year of fighting to achieve our goals with Iran. And he said, I don't want a long war. I want a short war. And they were like, okay, let's see. And, it's not going to be, it didn't happen, overnight. And it's going to take a while. If the United States persists and has patience and is willing to blockade Iran's ports and force them, the idea that they are that they cannot be defeated, I think, is a myth. It's a big lie. But a lot of people in the foreign policy establishment that have always wanted to appease Iran believe it. And that's where we are. And Trump has got to get back to understanding that they can't be negotiated with.
Well, all I can tell you is that I predicted Kamala Harris would win the last presidential election. And ever since, I have been trying to make amends to my listeners and get them back by making as many predictions as possible and being correct in those predictions.
my advice would be to stop making predictions.
No, I will not do that.
I've been in journalism for a long time, and it generally doesn't work. We as one of my mentors back at Columbia, back in the Ice Age, the great Eugene Rice, the head of the history department back then, said, nothing in history is inevitable. Everything is evitable. We walk into it walking backwards. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But the point is, we can understand who the players are and how they think. And there's a lot of magical thinking going on about Iran. And we'll see what happens.
We will see what happens. But my prediction, nonetheless, is that, as I've said over the last several shows, Donald Trump will screw this up. I just don't think he gets this animal. What he's never faced. This doesn't fit into his book on negotiations. It just the Iranians don't fit the mold of any other, and so he's got to start treating it that way. But I agree with you entirely. It is win or be done.
The one thing you can say in favor of Trump on Iran and eventually making right decisions is that he doesn't trust the expert class. That's been kind of his genius.
That is smart.
Inspiration throughout his 2 terms as president. That's why he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That's why he did so much that was right in the Middle East.
Oh, but what about all the bloodshed that'll happen when he does it, Jonathan?
Yeah, right. I mean, he got it that the experts can't be trusted. The foreign policy establishment can't be trusted. But, the problem is that he also has no patience for long struggles. And quite frankly, he's not, alone in that. Most Americans don't have patience for long struggles and wanting to pay, being willing to pay any price. And that's part of where we are on Iran right now.
Well, a 60-second digression, the expert class. Jonathan, didn't you write in the 90s with the expert class? Commentary Magazine is the expert class, no?
Well, Commentary is not the part of the foreign policy establishment. It was, it is the magazine. I mean, I was there after the 90s, just, point of correction.
Oh, all right.
Commentary, helped win the Cold War by fighting the foreign policy establishment of that time.
All right, good.
Um,
Yeah.
the smart people who thought the Soviet Union would never fall, and that, don't protect, don't support democracy. So no, I think commentary, the great Norman Bataritz,
Yes.
it's certainly innocent of being part of the expert class. The expert class are the people, at Foreign Policy Magazine. They're the people
Yes.
at all the think tanks in Washington,
Yes.
and largely populating the State Department for most of the last century. So they've generally always been wrong. It's Tom Friedman of the New York Times. People like
Oh,
that.
yes.
They're wrong pretty much, 100% of the
We call
time. So if you don't agree, if you just see what they say and do the opposite, you've got a really
you're
right.
usually pretty good, and we call Thomas Friedman from St. Louis Park, Minnesota, by the way.
That's right. Yeah,
A
favorite son of
yeah.
the Lake State.
Of the Lake State. Yeah, we call him the village idiot because he uses all these big words, and everyone thinks, "Oh, he's smart." Gee,
Terrible writer too. Especially.
All right, let's turn to Israel and Israeli politics. In just a few months here, we're going to have an election in Israel, and I understand that is it the Likud may be out of power for on being asked to put together a coalition for the first time in quite some time.
Well, it possibly, the people get their say. That's the thing about democracy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that that's going to be the outcome. I think the thing for people in the United States to understand about Israeli politics is that the Israeli people are deeply divided on one thing and generally united on another. They are deeply divided about whether Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been prime minister for a very long time, he actually, he was off for 18 months from 2021 to 2022, right. But he is the longest serving prime minister, in the country's history. He's been around, he's outstayed his welcome. He probably outstayed his welcome a long time ago. And he was also, October 7th happened on his watch, for which he deserves some responsibility, but in truth, so does the military and the intelligence establishment, and quite frankly, his political opponents, the opposition. They weren't advising him to do anything different prior to October 7th. There was no groundswell of support for the idea of, well, let's get rid of Hamas before October 7th. So it's a bit unfair, but, that's politics. So, he is controversial. A lot of people love him. A lot of people hate him. Sound familiar? A little like Trump, even though they're very different people. But the Israelis are also united about something else, and that is the policies that Netanyahu has pursued. There is virtually no support in Israel outside of the very far left or among the anti-Zionist Arab parties, which will get about 10% of the vote, about the idea of pursuing the same policies in Gaza, Lebanon, Iran that Netanyahu has pursued. His political opponents aren't going to do anything different. They're not going to surrender any territory. They're going to do more or less the same things in the same way as Netanyahu. Anybody who doesn't understand that doesn't understand Israel. Israelis used to be very divided, almost evenly, on sort of war and peace issues between the right and the left. That's no longer the case because after the Second Intifada literally blew up the Oslo Peace Accords, the withdrawal from Gaza that Ariel Sharon did in 2005 led to the creation of a Palestinian terror state in Gaza. And then now the example of what happens when you have an independent Palestinian state in all but name in Gaza, and if you tried that in the West Bank, you'd get something even worse than October 7th. So there's a consensus on policy. There is not a consensus on who will lead the country in the future. That said, I wouldn't sell Netanyahu short on his ability to get another term. It's entirely possible because there really isn't anyone else out there who sort of has, you could blame him for October 7th, but I think in many ways the 3 years since October 7th has been his finest hour in terms of guiding the country through war and dealing with the Biden-Kamala Harris administration and the international community ganging up on Israel and leading the comeback to weaken Israel's enemies since October 7th. Israel's in a much stronger position than it was on October 6, 2023. And a lot of the credit for that belongs to Netanyahu. So if you were to ask me to make a prediction, which I'm not going to do, but I think the most likely outcome of the election that will happen on October 27th is probably going to be a draw. I don't see right now, I mean, 3 months is a lifetime, in politics in Israel as well as in the United States. I don't see Netanyahu getting to 61, to getting the majority of the Knesset, and I don't see his opponents doing so either. And if that happens, as it did 3 times from 2019 through 2021, then it's just going to be a caretaker administration. Netanyahu will stay in office, and 6 months later they'll have another election to see if anything changes. But I don't see either side, I don't see either big grouping winning the election. And in parliamentary elections, you can have a draw, you can have a no outcome. They don't go to overtime, whether it's 3-on-3 like in hockey or just, shooting those silly penalty shots in soccer. They'll just do another election in 6 months.
What about who is it? Gadi Eisenkot?
Yeah.
He's getting close to a coalition in the polling that
Well,
might.
right now he's pretty much even, depending on which poll you read. And like here in the United States, some polls are left leaning and some are right leaning.
Mm-hmm.
He is an example of, he may turn out to be different, but until I'm proven wrong about this, I think the assumption is he's another person with no political experience who's a veteran Israeli general. For the last 40 to 50 years, we have seen people like that come into Israeli, parachute into Israeli politics as what we used to call in this country a man on a white horse, a military hero, with no political experience or savvy, try to be the fresh face that everybody likes, but then flounders. The more we know about him, the less likely people are to vote for him. We've seen this a couple of, just in recent memory. Benny Gantz, who was like Eisenkot, a former IDF chief of staff, he came in, he was the man on the white horse a few years ago, and now his party is so unpopular, he's been exposed as so hopeless as a politician that it's not likely he'll even get into the Knesset right now. Eisenkot may suffer a similar fate because nobody really knows what he believes or what he wants. We just know that he doesn't like Netanyahu, and he's very ambitious. And, people love fresh faces in politics, in Israel as in the United States. Maybe Eisenkot will prove to be, maybe he'll be the Dwight Eisenhower of Israel, the rare, the one former general who's won in politics in American history in the last 100 years. But I kind of doubt it.
Yes, and for all of you who are not aware, unlike in the United States, once you get to a certain level, you may be asked in Israel to put together a coalition of different parties all together who follows the lead of the largest. And that's what Bibi Netanyahu was able to do in the last election, which was unique, actually, in comparison to the previous several, where they couldn't figure out how to put together a coalition. But he was able to do that, and he did it with the religious right in large part. Some others as well, including Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, who people say are, racist, et cetera, and attack them. But the religious right. And those groups would, in all likelihood, if Bibi does not prevail, be out of the government in terms of the majority. Now, it may be that they are asked to join the majority. It's possible, I suppose, but Anyway,
Well,
these are some nuance.
the thing you have to understand about Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they represent, the fact that they're as popular as they are is largely because of, because of Palestinian rejection of peace. I mean, people of Israel know who their enemies are, and so that kind of feeds into, the religious right in Israel. But the only reason they're in government, is not because Netanyahu loves them or wants them to be his colleagues. He really can't stand them. But the fact is, the sort of center-left parties that could have easily formed a coalition with Netanyahu. They don't really disagree with him on foreign policy and war and peace issues, as I said before. There's no real gap between them. But they hate Netanyahu, and they don't want to sit in government with him. So as a result, there was a, sort of, for the first time in Israel's history, a coalition formed that was solely composed of, the center-right Likud and the parties to its right. There were no parties to the left included in it, but that was because they wouldn't sit with Netanyahu. They just hate him so much, in the way, like the way Democrats hate Donald Trump. And as a result, that put Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in the cabinet. So they, the left has no one to blame for them but themselves.
No doubt. No doubt.
Will that happen again? I don't know. Politics, in Israel as in the United States, it's not beanbag. They play. It's a contact sport, and they play for keeps. But we don't know how the numbers will fall. And I think Netanyahu would like very much to have a more broad coalition for his next government, if he can form one. But I don't see his political enemies just want to get rid of him. And as long as that is so, I don't think they can be part of a governing coalition. I don't think they can. I think they will. It will. It's kind of a self-defeating gesture, which goes into. We could go into a much longer discussion about other issues in Israel. This, cultural war between the sort of leftist elites and sort of ordinary people who are more nationalist, more likely to be religious. It's as much a cultural and ethnic battle as it is one over policies, and that's how the election is likely to go. It's kind of very sectarian, and we'll see. Netanyahu remains the hero to about a third of Israelis who will vote for him and Likud no matter what. And he's hated by another faction that will never vote for him no matter what. How the other parties sort it out will determine the outcome of the election.
And that has transferred itself over across the sea to the United States, as you find the left in the United States have such a hatred for Bibi Netanyahu that they will make state anti-Semitic tropes just in order to express themselves and their dislike and disagreement with Bibi, and believe that it excuses all of their anti-Israel rhetoric.
Yeah, well, the thing is, we have to understand that's kind of an excuse.
Yeah,
there's a decent chance Netanyahu is not going to be the prime minister next year. But you know what? Whoever is the prime minister, whether his name is Eisenkot or somebody else, the policies he pursues towards the Palestinians and towards Lebanon
aren't going to be that
towards Iran are going to be no different than Netanyahu's. And so then what's your excuse? The people who are screaming genocide, they're screaming genocide at all Israel, not Netanyahu. And I don't think they're going to like any other Israeli leader any better than they do Netanyahu.
We are very thankful, honored to have had Jonathan Tobin with us on the show today, editor-in-chief of Jerusalem News Syndicate. Go to JNS.org to learn more about one of the top news stories if you really want to hear the foundational facts, the truth about what's going on, with some outstanding insights about what's going on, not just in Israel, but in the Middle East generally, and as it relates to the U.S. Israel relationship. That is the Jerusalem News Syndicate, JNS.org. We thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining us on this episode of the Andrew Parker Show. We hope to have you on again soon. And until next time, folks, go to theandrewparkershow.com. Like, subscribe, send us your email address so you get the next episode dropped immediately when it comes out. And text us, if you will, at 952-522-2818, 952-522-2818. Until our next episode, and then we're together, please be kind to your neighbor. For more Smart Plain Talk, go to theandrewparkershow.com. Learn about all of your listening and viewing options. And remember, all the great things are simple, and many can be expressed in a single word: freedom, justice, honor, duty, mercy, hope. This episode of The Andrew Parker Show is sponsored by Parker Daniels Keyboard.
Did your employer make you sign a promissory note when joining the company, and now you want to leave, but you're afraid your firm will pursue you personally for that debt? This is Jesse Keyboard from the law firm Parker Daniels Keyboard. I recently represented a client who had signed such a note, and I was able to get them out of their $500,000 debt to their company, which allowed them the freedom to exit a bad employment situation and enter a much better one. Meeting our clients' objectives is our focus at Parker Daniels Keyboard, and in this regard, we win. Our experienced trial team of lawyers at Parker Daniels Keyboard have secured major victories in state and federal courts across the country and through arbitration. We have the legal expertise in all types of business disputes, labor and employment matters, real estate matters, shareholder disputes, financial transactions, security issues, and appeals. For wise counsel, winning results, contact us at Parker Daniels Keyboard, a premier litigation law firm that provides efficient, aggressive, and innovative solutions to complex legal problems. Wise counsel, winning results. Go to parkerdk.com.